eggs, choline bisulfate, and TMAO. Hi, I'm Chris Masterjohn, and I have a PhD in nutritional sciences. I am not a medical doctor, and nothing contained in this episode may be construed as medical or nutritional advice of any kind, or a substitute therefore. This episode is meant purely as scientific education. If you wish to act on any ideas presented in this episode, please consult your physician first, and never take anything herein as a reason to contradict medical advice. With that said, enjoy the episode. Matt Palazzolo says, hello, Chris. Question regarding choline. I eat 3 to 4 eggs a day, 3 to 4 ounces of fish 2 to 3 times a week, and 3 to 4 ounces of red meat 2 to 3 times a week. I also supplement 300 to 600 milligrams of alpha GPC a couple times a week as I feel it helps me with cognition. I've come across some conflicting info regarding TMAO and high choline consumption. I know the upper limit is somewhere around 1,200 milligrams with the GPC supplement. Should I be concerned? What biomarkers would you look for on a blood panel? It's funny. Just before I came on, I did a really quick YouTube live on this exact topic. So I was just looking at the data. I might as well just show the data real quick, and I can do it more quickly now since I already spent time trying to figure out and orient it myself to it before. Well, before I share my screen, let me close off the panelist names. Let me make sure I don't have any data out from clients. Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen and come over here. So first of all, this was a study where the Cleveland Clinic, who are in the leading camp of the sort of TMAO causes heart disease, choline and carnitine from red meat and eggs cause TMAO to rise, which causes heart disease camp. And this was a study where they tested, I believe it was 500 milligrams twice daily. So 1,000 milligrams, 500 milligrams of choline bisulfate, which equals 450 milligrams of total choline per day. And the graph's a little confusing because the TMAO is printed in numbers on the bottom. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Okay, so the TMAO is printed on numbers in the bottom. And what they did was they took the blood from the subjects, and in vitro, they dumped ADP on it as a stimulus of clotting to see the aggregation of the blood as a percent of maximal response. And so plotted in the bars and on this axis of 40 to 60% is the percent of maximal aggregation response. And so it's basically the degree of clotting potential. This is not clotting. This is clotting potential. And you have to realize that you wouldn't necessarily observe this in vivo because the factors that cause clotting could be altered by the supplementation in addition to the potential of the blood to clot in response to those signals. So this does not show that choline bisulfate causes clotting. But it does support the hypothesis that it could increase clotting. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, this increases my concern that high levels of TMAO in the blood cause clotting up to a 3 out of 10. So I'm still not too worried about it. Nevertheless, what they showed here is on the left is baseline, in the middle is 1 month, and on the right, this is all in the left panel, panel A. So the red and green Christmas bars on the left are baseline. In the middle, they are 1 month of consuming choline bisulfate, 500 milligrams of choline a day. And on the right, they are 2 months of consuming the choline. And then the green bars are vegetarians and vegans. The red bars are omnivores. And the vegans have a microbiome that is less likely to generate TMAO. The omnivores have a microbiome that is more likely to generate TMAO. They've shown this previously in a different study. Now, while the size of the bars indicates the degree of clotting risk. Keep in mind, this is not a 0 to 100 y-axis. This is a 40 to 60 y-axis. So it dramatically exaggerates the visual, your visual perception of the difference in the bars is dramatically exaggerating the difference between the treatments compared to what it would be on a 0 to 100 basis. But on the bottom is where you see the plasma TMAO. So it's 2.5 is baseline micromolar. And then in vegetarians and vegans, that goes up to 27.2 mean. I guess I should note I should note the variation in this response. Well, the variation is too much. Well, let me look at it quickly. I don't remember whether this is standard error or standard. If it's standard error, it's going to be really difficult to get a sense of the variation because I'm going to have to do calculations and stuff. So, yeah, it's standard. This is standard error. Okay, I'm not doing that calculation. Let's just take the means because that gives us most of the information. So the mean TMAO is going up to 27.2 in the vegans and vegetarians at 1 month, and it's going up to 28.9 at 2 months. In the omnivores, it's going up to 36.4 at 1 month and to 36.8 at 2 months. So it looks like there's a teeny tiny increase from the 1 month to 2 month mark, but basically the 1 month TMAO is the maximal TMAO response to the choline supplementation. And you can see here that basically it's going up into the high 20s in the vegetarians and vegans, and it's going up to the mid 30s in the omnivores. And the the aggregation response in the blood is going from around maybe 43%, low 40%, let's say, at baseline, to 48% in the vegetarians and vegans at 1 month and 50-ish% at 2 months in the vegetarians and vegans, and going up to about 55% in omnivores and 57% or so at 2 months. And then in the middle graph, you can see that there's basically what they're plotting here is the aggregation response in individual people against their plasma TMAO. And you basically see these are mostly baseline values here plotted as a vertical here. So there's basically no correlation at low levels of TMAO. And if you want to visually inspect this, you can kind of say somewhere around 20 micromolar is where you're starting to see a correlation emerge. And it's, let's see, what's the R value is 0.66. And so let's see, 0.66, if we're going to square this, 0.6, ooh, that's not what I wanted. 66 times 66 point is, so it's 43% of the variation in the clotting risk is explained by the TMAO. But that correlation is kicking into gear basically at the 20 micromolar point, and it's lasting to some, maybe say the 60 micromolar point. So that's the range where the TMAO is actually correlated with this response. So based on the group means getting up at least to 27 where you're seeing the response, and the correlation seeming to kick in at least around 20, with most of it taking place in the 30 to 60 range, I'm going to say if you don't get up to 20 micromolar TMAO, you're probably not getting this clotting potential response. I emphasize again that they didn't show clotting was increased, and this doesn't mean that clotting is increased in vivo. Okay, so now let's go to the egg data. This is where they gave people 0 eggs, 1 egg, 2 egg, 4 egg, or 6 eggs. 1 egg has 136 milligrams of choline in it. So to do the math here, 4 eggs has 544 milligrams of choline in it. 2 eggs has 272 milligrams of choline in it. And 6 eggs has 816 milligrams of choline in it. Most of this choline is phosphatidylcholine. Not all of it, but most of it. If you go to Masterjohn choline database, search that on Google, and you'll get you can get the breakdown of different forms of choline in eggs. But it's predominantly phosphatidylcholine. And so remember, the Cleveland Clinic studies looking at 450 milligrams of total choline per day to increase TMAO up to 27 or 28 or 29 in vegans and up into the high 30s in omnivores. 450 milligrams of choline per day is less than 4 eggs, and it's more than 2 eggs. So that's probably around 3 eggs per day is probably what's going to give you that dose of choline. That is, now look at this. So here the vertical axis of TMAO goes from 0 to 20. The only person who hit, and remember the vegans and vegetarians went to 26 on 450 milligrams of choline. The omnivores went to high 30s. Okay, so the only person that even makes it up to 20 is subject 4 eating 6 eggs per day, which is giving 816 milligrams of choline. So clearly, the person with maximal TMAO potential presumably based on their gut microbiome is not getting anywhere near the vegans or vegetarians when consuming almost twice as much choline from eggs. Now, the general response is to be able to eat 6 eggs, half the people, so subject 1, subject 2, and subject 5, half these people ate 6 eggs, providing 816 milligrams of choline, and didn't get anywhere near 10, which is less than half, almost down to a third as much TMAO as the vegetarians and vegans had on 450 milligrams of choline. And 10 is less than a third of what the omnivores had. So half of subjects can eat 6 eggs at one time and not hit what any of those people were getting not hit half of what it takes to increase clotting risk, to increase ex vivo clotting risk potential. But even in subject 4, who has the greatest TMAO generation, they're getting basically a non-response to 1 and 2 eggs a day. So even a worst case scenario, if you're eating 2 eggs, you're not really generating TMAO. So that's the data. Now let me give my, okay, how do I get back to Zoom here? Stop share. Okay. Now let me give my sort of summary of this. So the best, if you really want to know what eggs are doing to your TMAO, then I'm pretty sure Cleveland Clinic has a TMAO blood test, and that would be the best way to do it. Yeah, the Cleveland Heart Lab has a TMAO blood test. So you could test your response to this. If you didn't want to test, then if you assumed the worst case scenario, I would say you could probably just eat 2 eggs at a time and you would not raise your TMAO that much. But if you do test TMAO, you can probably show that you might be able to get away with eating 6 eggs at a time and not raise your TMAO that much. But the thing is, I don't think you're going to get the same response from 6 eggs a day as you would 6 eggs at a time, as in that study, as you would get from eating 2 eggs separated and spread out from the day. And the reason is, I think the TMAO is mostly generated from the choline that does not get absorbed in the small intestine going to the colon being available to the microbiome. So if you lower the dose of eggs and spread them out, then you should be able to kind of totally head off significant TMAO generation. So on a guesswork basis, I would say worst case scenario is you should limit eggs to 2 at a time. But if you want to test TMAO, you may be able to show that you're in the clear eating 6 eggs at a time. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how bothered am I enough to justify testing my TMAO? I would put 3 out of 10, and I've never tested my TMAO because 3 out of 10 has not motivated me to test my TMAO. So hope that helps. Matt follows up. On a side note, I know you mentioned on your podcast with Peter Attia, choline supplements being somewhere around 30% of the listed choline on the bottle. Is that the same for GPC? So Alpha GPC, actually, this is, I put this in the Cliff Notes, which as MasterPass members, you have access to. It's somewhere around 40% for Alpha GPC, but let me just pull up the numbers because I know I have them in the Cliff Notes. Looking at the label, if you're using Alpha GPC, where did it go? Multiply it by 0.4. And then phosphatidylcholine, you want to multiply by 0.13 to get the dose. And if you ever want to know yourself, so I guess I'm going to answer my own. So thank you, Matt, for your question. I hope that helped.
This episode was part of a Q&A for members of the CMJ MasterPass, where I hold monthly private Zoom Q&As for my members. The MasterPass also serves as a buyer's club with exclusive and massive discounts on your favorite premium foods and health products, including pasture-raised and wild meat and seafood, supplements, sleep accessories, water filters, phototherapy devices, and much more. If you'd like to participate in these Q&As, you can join the MasterPass at chrismasterjohnphd.com/masterpass and use the code Q&A, spelled Q-A-N-D-A, Q&A, for 10% lifetime discount. I am currently working full-time on finishing my first book, Vitamins and Minerals 101, How to Get the Nutrients You Need on Any Diet. I will let you know when I have a release date. In the meantime, you can pre-order the book at chrismasterjohnphd.com/book. Testing Nutritional Status, the Ultimate Cheat Sheet, has been newly released as version 1.3. This is my comprehensive system for managing nutritional status with lab tests, dietary analysis, and comprehensive intake of your signs and symptoms. The new version has a comprehensive guide to interpreting the Genova methylation panel. You can pick up your copy at chrismasterjohnphd.com/cheat sheet. In my consulting, I am neither a medical practitioner nor a coach. I serve as your data analyst and your strategist. I teach you scientific principles of health and wellness, help you analyze your data, and help brainstorm actionable strategies. You can sign up for a consultation at chrismasterjohnphd.com/consultations. Please consider supporting my work at no extra cost to you by visiting my support page and making a purchase with one of my affiliate links. Some of my most popular affiliates are also listed in the description of this video, with links that will give me credit for your purchase. I will try to respond to comments when I can, but my presence will be intermittent while I'm finishing my book. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next episode.